Let's talk about domain and range. And now we're going to talk about what is a function, all right? So a function is defined when one x value goes directly to one y value. So therefore, if you're trying to figure out if this is a function, there's actually a really easy way to do that. To figure out if this relation is a function. And it's called the vertical line test, all right? So what the vertical line test says is that if you draw a vertical line anywhere on this graph, if that vertical line intersects more than one point, then it's not a function. Alright, so again, if I draw a vertical line anywhere on here, and that line intersects more than one point, then that is not a function. Alright, however, if you look at this one, if you draw a vertical line anywhere on here, anywhere on this graph, that vertical line will intersect one point. So in that case, this is a function. Okay? Now, when we talk about domain, what we're really talking about is how far to the left and how far to the right does this function go. All right, now if you look at it, now right here, this is as far left as this function is going to go. And this x value in this point is -5. So we're going to use some terminology perhaps you're not familiar with. So notice that I'm putting in parentheses 5, and the reason I'm putting in parentheses is because this open dot means that -5 is not actually included in the domain. Alright, so -5 is not included. Now as we go to the right, notice that the domain, actually part of it ends right here, and that number is -2. Okay? Now on this -2, I'm actually going to write a bracket, a square bracket like this, because this point right here, -2, is included in the domain, all right? And then from there, well, the domain goes from here to here, and it also goes from here, which the x value right there is 0, not inclusive, and then it goes to right here, which is around 2. Okay, so the domain then keeps going from 0 to 2, which is right here. And then finally it's going to go from 2 to positive infinity. All right, so we're going to go from 2, non-inclusive, remember, because this is an open dot, meaning that 2 is not included. And that's going to go between 2 and positive infinity. Now the reason we're writing positive infinity is because you see this arrow. That arrow represents that function is going to keep going to the right forever. Alright? Now with any type of infinity, whether it's negative infinity or positive infinity, you're going to write that set notation with a parentheses, because infinity is not an actual value that you can approach. Okay, so every time you use infinity, you're going to write a parentheses. Alright, now on the range, alright, when we talk about the range, we're actually talking about how far down and how far up does this function go. Now if you look at it, the lowest point on here, alright, the lowest point on here is located about right there, alright, which is the y coordinate right here would be -3 and is non-inclusive, right? So the range, how low and how high is this going to go? Now as I look at it, alright, as I go up, notice that this arrow is really going to take over from that point, and that's going to keep going up. Now it doesn't matter that this is broken here, alright? What matters is that there is a value. Every y value has been taken over once you go above this line. Alright, so once you go above this point, every y value is accounted for, even if it's only on this side. Alright? Notice that the domain is all broken up, but the range is from -3 to infinity. And it doesn't matter that there's a hole here, because there's actually a line here. Alright, so that gets covered by that. And it doesn't matter there's a hole here, kind of similarly, because there's a point here also, alright, for the range. Remember, we're talking about up and down. Alright, on to the next one. So on example number 2, the question is this a function? And remember, it has to pass the vertical line test. Now as you look at it, you might be tempted to say that it's not, because if I draw a vertical line here, right? Well, it's actually only touching this one point because this is an open dot. So right here, actually I do have a function, right? Because if I draw a vertical line anywhere on this graph, it would only intersect one point on here. Alright, so this is a function. Now, on the domain, if you look at it, alright, the domain goes from negative infinity. Notice we have the arrow, so it's going to go from negative infinity. And remember, we cannot include negative infinity. It's not an actual number. Alright, and it goes all the way. Now you may think it stops here, but when it goes here, you go down here, then it keeps going. Then once you get to right here, you go up here, then it goes forever. My point is, if this is confusing, is that from left to right, every x value is being covered. Alright, so from left to right, you're going to go from negative infinity to positive infinity. Or also, some mathematicians call that all real numbers. So you can either write this r, which represents basically everything, every number except for the imaginaries. Alright, or you can write this set notation, which is between negative and positive infinity. Now for the range is going to be a little bit different now. Now the range, we're going to look for the lowest y value on here. And if you look at it, this is the lowest point on this graph, which in this case would be -3. Now it doesn't matter there's a hole there because there's a filled in point right here. So this would be between -3. Actually, and if you look at it, this is part of the range, right? This is -3, but there's nothing between here and here, and there's nothing below here. So notice that I wrote the range as y is equal to -3, which represents this line right here, okay? Now, above that, notice that the next point that I'm going to be looking at is this y value right here. So this y value is 0. And actually, because we have a filled in dot right here, this 0 is going to be included in the range. Okay? And now as we look at it, we want to see how far up does this go. Now, notice that the arrows actually on both sides are going up forever. Alright, so this would be between 0, including 0, and positive infinity. Alright? On the range, you always want to go from the lowest value to the highest value, and then the domain, you want to go from the left value to the right value. Okay. All right, on number 3. All right, is this a function? Basically, what I'm asking you is, does this pass the vertical line test? And this one does. Okay, so this is a function. Now, the domain is going to be broken up into 3 different pieces. It goes between here and here, then you have that piece, then you have that piece. Remember, the domain is how far left, how far right did I go. So I have this little piece, and that piece, alright? So notice that to look at the domain of this little piece alone, that goes between -infinity and -5. Remember, this is the x value of that point, would be -5, inclusive. So I'm going to include that -5 right there. And I'm also going to go between -3 and +2. And notice that I have filled in dots, so I have to write brackets. All right, so this is -3, comma, +2. Okay? Now after that, I have to look at the domain of this little piece right here. The domain of that little piece goes between +3, including 3. And then notice that right here, you have an arrow, which means it keeps going forever to the right. So that means it goes between 3, including 3, and then +infinity. And remember, every time you write an infinity, it has to go in parentheses. Now, for the range, all right, for the range, notice that you start right here. You have 3 separate pieces. You have this one. Notice how I'm doing this lowest point, highest point in this one, lowest point, highest point in that one, lowest point, highest point in that one, right? So the range is actually going to be broken up into 3 different pieces for this one also. So this would be, let's see, this right here would be -6. And notice that because I have a solid line, I'm going to write this bracket, which means the range includes -6. And it goes all the way to -1. Okay, then this one's going to go between 1, including 1, and all the way to 3. And then finally at the end, this is going to go between 4, and this piece right here is at 4, y value of that, and it goes forever up, which means that it's going to go towards +infinity. Alright, so that's that for that one. Okay, now on the next one, now I can finally show you something that's not a function. if you look at this circle, if I were to draw a line, say right here, okay, you are intersecting 2 points on this relation, and because of that, this is not a function, all right? So is this a function? No, it's not, because it fails the vertical line test because it touches more than 1 point on this graph. Okay, now let's talk about the domain. Now in the domain, notice you have 2 pieces to take care of. You have this little piece right here, and then you have that piece, all right? Notice there's a little space there. So I'm going to try to figure out the domain for this. How far to the left, how far to the right did I go? And in this case, this would be -8. Let's see, -5, 6, 7, 8, okay. Notice that it's including 8 because this is a solid line. And then I'm going to go all the way to here, which is -1. And that is also including -1. Now I'm going to have to take care of the domain for that little piece right there. So you start at +2, non-inclusive, because there's an open hole right here, or an open dot. And it goes to the right, which means it's going to go to +infinity. Okay? Now for the range, you're going to do almost the same thing as the domain, but what I care about is how far, how low and how high do I go. So notice that I'm doing like this. What is the y coordinate right here where my thumb is? What is the y coordinate up here with my index fingers at? Alright, so this is a little bit tricky. This one has, you start, definitely the lowest point on this graph is -2. However, you might be tempted to go here, like I was even just like a few minutes ago. But notice that after this, what happens? Well, after that, you still have y values because you have this line over here. So after that, you're actually going to write +infinity. So again, you have -2 is the lowest point. What's the highest point on this graph? Well, the highest point is this arrow, and that arrow points towards +infinity. Okay? All right, let's move on to the back. And I'm going to move through these sort of quickly. All right? And if you need some time to think about it, pause it and see if you can do this yourself. All right? So the question is this a function? And the answer is yes. Now remember that right here, a vertical line even right here, you have a solid point, you have an open point, which means that it does pass the vertical line test. This is non-inclusive, right? So it's a function. Now the domain and the range are going to be like this. All right, the domain, let's pretend there's a little arrow here. I don't know if that was left off on purpose or not, but let's just pretend there's an arrow there. And if there's an arrow there, that means that it goes forever to the left, and this one's going forever to the right. Now, the domain is going to go between here and here, but then at this point, I can go between here and here, and then here and here, which means that the domain covers every single number on this number line. Every x value has been taken over. All right, so this is going to be between -infinity and +infinity, which means it's all real numbers, and the range is going to be all real numbers also, because what's my lowest point? Well, it goes down forever. What's my highest point? It goes up forever. Now there's this broken up piece, but even that broken piece is actually connected. And actually, no, it's not. I just noticed that. My bad. That actually goes between -infinity and -2. Okay. Notice that again. I have open hole. I have an open dot here. I have to break this up. Now I'm going to go between -2 and +infinity. Okay. Alright, so let's move on to number 11. Now number 11 is going to be broken up into 3 pieces. The domain is going to go between here and here, here and here, and here and here. Okay, so I'm going to write it. Is this a function? Yes. And here's the domain and the range. Notice that that piece right here is that one, this piece right here is this one, and then that final piece is that. Okay? Now for the range, notice that I'm going like this. That little piece between -infinity and 0, this is the y coordinate right here, would be 0. And then between 0 and 3, which is the y coordinate. And then between 3 and positive infinity. Alright? Okay, now, just to save some time, okay, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, so see if you can figure out how I'm doing them, alright? If you have any questions, make sure you ask tomorrow. This can be kind of difficult, alright, especially if you haven't done domain and range for very long. Alright, so domain, is this a function? Yes. Alright, here comes the domain. The domain is going to go between here and here, which is going to be -5 to -1, including -1, and then we're going to go between 0 and positive infinity. And the range is going to go between here and here, which is -infinity, to -2, including -2. And then we have between that point, that's the lowest point here, and that's the highest point there. So we have 0 and +2. Both of them inclusive, right? So before I run out of time, I'm going to go ahead and basically go through these without much explaining. So make sure you ask me. Now, if the question is this a function? Then the answer is no, because if you draw a vertical line, even right here, for example, it touches 2 points. So this one fails the vertical line test, so this is not a function, all right? The domain on this one would be between -5, including -5, and +5. And the range is going to be, I'm going to call that like -4.5, I'm going to call that like +3.5. So this is -4.5 and 3.5. Okay. This one function, let's see, it looks like it passes the vertical line test, so yes. The domain is between -infinity, between -5 and positive infinity. And then this would be, the range would be between -infinity and -2. So between -infinity and -2, and between 0 and +5. Okay. Alright, this one right here is a little bit interesting. The domain, is this a function? It is. Okay, so I'm not going to write that, but it is a function. The domain would be everything from left to right, so this would be all real numbers. Remember, you can write it as between -infinity and positive infinity. The range, however, notice that you have this line, that line, and that line. Okay, so you're actually going to have y is equal to -4, -2, and 1. Alright, so again, that line, this line, and that line. That's why I put -4, -2, and +1. Okay? Alright, on 16, is this a function? No, it's not actually. It fails the vertical line test right here. Alright, so function, it's a no. Alright, the domain is going to be all real numbers, or, and you don't have to write both of them, I'm just giving you choices here, or between -infinity and positive infinity. The range is going to be, let's see, y is equal to 0 and 3. Alright, y is equal to 0 is because of this line, and y is equal to 3 is because of this line. Alright, on this one, function, yes, it passes the vertical line test. Domain, all real numbers. Range, well, the range is only this line, right? It doesn't go any lower than this line or higher than this line. So this line is, the equation for the line is y is equal to 1. All right. Now number 18, finally, the last one. Is this a function? That's a no, right? I mean, this is literally a vertical line. So if I were to draw a vertical line right on top of that, then that's not going to work. Domain Notice that the domain, how far to the left, how far to the right do I go? The answer is it doesn't go any farther left than this line or farther right than this line. So therefore, you will write this as x is equal to 1. That's the equation of this line. Now the range is going to be all real numbers or between negative infinity to positive infinity. Now don't get that confused. It's negative infinity because it's going down, and positive infinity because it's going up for the range. All right, so the range, how far down, how far up did I go between negative infinity and positive infinity? All right, if you managed to listen to this whole thing, this could be pretty confusing. Make sure you do try to understand it. We are going to go over some examples tomorrow.